Sure. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I will see you next month. So if you're he is on the jury to give a big prize. I'm sharing, so I will see him at the jury meeting. No problems for students. No, he's wonderful. But they're, even among scholars, there are people who are very focused on students. So someone like Quentin Skinner, who has had many students, other people who don't. They are always busy in public and not with books. I try to be the student-oriented kind, but I'm not a student. I can't say so. I'm now in the United States, retired from the LSE and moved to Arizona State University. I have a chair in Richmond with students and intellectual work instead of the direct president. And enough years of university. I'm very happy to be in these areas. Nice to see you. You'll be the first speaker. Someone is putting on each presentation. Someone else will make your presentation. We have 4 different presentations. One is just the slide session. Then there will be our presentation. Kate's presentation. How will we change from the first and then after? It's going to change from one presentation. Okay. All right. Against that. Of the session. Exactly. Great, thank you. No.
The session slide.
There should be a slide saying World Social Science.
You put it on the front of the beginning. Add it to the same PowerPoint.
It's not one of those. Let me see if we can find it.
No. It's all the tree.
Gotcha.
It's a fraction of Toronto, the English part. So it's definitely because it's not Quebec. It's the poor problem. Yes, exactly.
本当にありがとう。本当にオンに来てるんですね。いやいや、セッションやってくださって。
So here's
but then it's not the obvious. So Japanese first name, and then that's it. Yes. Oh yes, oh, but no, 6 things. So let me say, there is one is science.
how are you? Very well.
No, sorry.
Very creative first impression. And I love it. Used to be there was an outdoor there's a great chair where I could do whatever I want. Inside a creative that would make things first. It's good. And I didn't want to be the president.
Business
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for a second? Just to say that we are going to start in 5 minutes. But in the meantime, can I ask you to please concentrate a little bit? There's a lot of people in the back. It would be good if you could sit on this side of the room, and as much as possible, concentrate to the middle part of the room as well, so that we feel a little bit closer, we feel a little bit of warmth. This event will be live streamed, so it would be good if we had a few people in the front rows, for instance. So I would ask you to just, perhaps regroup a little bit. That's fine. Thank you.
There are many people that keep saying it's Are you sure? It doesn't look like it. It doesn't count it? Yes. Oh, yes. But the room is big. He doesn't. Hold on. Yeah. At least somewhat. Laid the groundwork. Oh, good. It's everything.
UNCCYT.
Feel free.
More for so they're
No, I got that.
respected.
Mine, you won't come to me. 14.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the 4th World Social Science Forum. Welcome also to those of you joining us live via live stream on the internet. And I especially want to thank and give a warm welcome to all of you who've traveled a long way to come here. We're very happy to have you with us today. My name is Mathieu Denis. I'm the Science Director of the International Science Council, the organization behind the series of World Social Science Fora. And I must say we're very happy to be here, very happy to here in Fukuoka, very happy to be hosted by Kyushu University for this forum on security and equality to a sustainable future. As you probably know, there will be an official opening ceremony tonight, later today, around 5. But in the meantime, we're starting with our first plenary session. We're very proud to have a panel of very distinguished guests looking at different aspects of existential risk. I'm not going to say anything about the guests now. I'm not going to say anything about the topic. I'm going to let our moderator do that. But please allow me to say a few words about the moderator of this event. Craig Calhoun is probably, as all of you know, is probably one of the world's most renowned social scientists. It seems that he's been heading all the important organizations from the Social Science Research Council in the United States, London School of Economics. He was the first president of a major social science think tank called the Berggruen Institute. And now he is a professor of social sciences at Arizona State University. I'm not going to say more. We're going to have plenty of time to thank all of the organizations behind this forum later today. So without waiting much longer, please join me and welcome warmly our panelists today.
Thank you very much. Let me reiterate the welcome which Mathieu Denis has offered to everyone who has traveled, even if you have only traveled from the other side of Fukuoka. This session is on existential risks, a theme which runs throughout this entire conference and which runs through the world that we live in today. The issue of existential risks concerns threats to human existence as we know it. This doesn't have to mean mass extinction. It could mean dramatic transformation. But this is the other side of the coin from sustainability. This is the opposite, then, of sustainability. The risk that there cannot be continuity in human societies. The risks are of several kinds. They include environmental risks, climate change, environmental degradation, the proliferation of various kinds of waste, both toxic and simply the non-biodegradable materials that clog our oceans. The risks are sometimes technologically driven, with genetic engineering or artificial intelligence creating a variety of potentially dramatic risks, as they create also some new possibilities of benefits for society. The risks are economic, to sustainable economic development, to more equitable distributions of wealth in society, to the simple continued production of the food and other necessities for sustenance. The risks are social and include the issues of social infrastructure, the conditions for being able to sustain our lives together in cities and in other kinds of socially created settings. And they are political, starting with war, but including the failure of most political regimes to respond in significant enough ways to the issues of basic existential risk. So existential risks are one reason why a global voice for science is needed. Or really, they are 100 reasons, because there are not just a few such reasons. A global voice of science is the project of the new International Science Council, bringing together social scientists, natural and physical scientists, technologists, in trying to better understand and better bring understanding to policymakers and other leaders on the range of concerns that need deeper research-based knowledge. In the case of existential risks, technical understanding and understanding the social issues need to go hand in hand. They are not separate. These are not first technological or material and then somehow after that social concerns. They are from the beginning, both social and techno-scientific issues. Social factors shape the creation of risks. Consider capitalism or population structure, urbanization, energy use. These are all societal factors that have an impact alongside more purely technological factors. They shape who is affected by risks and how. The important gender organization of both vulnerability and response to risks, other inequalities that shape the pattern of risks. They shape efforts to reduce risks, carbon trading, or simply the promotion of peace in the world, the use of renewable energy, remaking of infrastructure. They shape responses to the actual disasters which occur because of the risks. The response to migration, refugees, potentially climate refugees, the organization of response and care and of reconstruction after disasters. Our social science disciplines have not put these questions always at the forefront. By and large, disciplinary knowledge in the social sciences has pursued a range of other concerns, important concerns. But now, increasingly, interdisciplinary social science is recognizing the urgency of participating in producing a better global understanding of existential risks. There are no solutions to these risks without dramatic societal transformation. There may be space colonization, but there will not be new settlements in space of a scale that enables an escape to space to be a solution to the problems that are being created on Earth. Can transformation be positive? Yes. One of the important lessons of social science research on disasters and on existential risks is that making societies better now, designing better infrastructures, designing better cities, creating more gender and other forms of equality, making societies better now, makes for a more effective response to risks and actual disasters. So we have potential to be able to do the job of social science in new and important ways, addressing existential risk. And we are aided by the International Science Council and the joint effort with our colleagues in other fields in producing a global voice for science. We are fortunate to have here some key participants in this project of deepening the understanding of existential risk, responding in practical ways to the actual disasters that result from risks. We have first, I hope, looking at what's happening here. No, we have B, we have enough of B already. We have Kate Raworth of the University of Oxford, who has formerly worked for Oxfam, that's distinct from Oxford, the important international aid organization, for the UN Development Program, helping to write the Human Development Report, and for the Organization for Development Assistance. She's a leader in the effort to rethink economics. I think she would not be adverse to being seen as a slightly renegade economist, but a renegade economist with a mission to remake economics, not simply run away from it. To remake economics to create understanding adequate to contemporary challenges, and to strengthen interdisciplinary international engagements. She is the author, most recently, of Doughnut Economics. And now I pass the vital control to Kate Raworth.
Thank you very much, Craig, and thank you. Thank you to the organisers of this conference. I'm really delighted to be here. So, on existential risk, the risk I would like to talk about is the risk that humanity is only just beginning to wake up to understanding what are the fundamentals of our human well-being. And I want to illustrate this with a donut. So let me begin with a health warning. Don't eat too many of these, okay? I'm not talking about this kind of donuts. I'm going to introduce you to the only donut that actually turns out to be good for us. And it's here on the screen behind. So imagine in this image, humanity's use of resources radiating out from the center of the picture, which means that the hole in the middle of the donut is the place where people are falling short on the essentials of life, where people do not have the resources they need to meet their claims to water, food, housing, education, healthcare, energy, political voice, gender equality, and the other essentials that the world's governments have already agreed that every human being has a claim to. I crowdsourced these 12 social dimensions from the Sustainable Development Goals. So they are the most contemporary statement of what the world community agrees every person has a claim to. We want nobody left in the center of the donut, falling short on those essentials, but everybody over that social foundation into the green ring itself. This is a very well understood facet of human well-being, understood since the creation of Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. But, and this is a big but, there is another side to human well-being, one that we are only just beginning to understand. Because although we want to get everybody out of the hole in the middle of the donut, we also cannot afford to overshoot the outer circle, that ecological ceiling. And around the ecological ceiling are what are known as the 9 planetary boundaries, Earth system processes that are life-supporting systems for humanity, first recognized by a group of around 30 Earth system scientists in 2009, led by Johan Rockström and Will Steffen. And they believe that these 9 life-supporting systems are what hold Earth in the Holocene phase she's been in for the last 11,000 years. They have together created the home sweet home that makes Earth such a hospitable environment for humanity. So we need to avoid pushing ourselves out of this balance. We need to avoid causing climate change, acidifying the oceans, creating chemical pollution, air pollution, excessive fertilizer use that causes eutrophication and killing off life in Earth's lakes and rivers. Not withdrawing so much fresh water from lakes and rivers that we actually change their flow and undermine the hydrological cycle. Not converting so much of Earth's land surface that we begin to create a vulnerability in the underlying systems, and also creating biodiversity loss. And lastly, ozone depletion, ensuring that we have a protective ozone layer overhead. So in drawing this donut, I built upon the planetary boundaries framework, and I drew in the inner circle, because I believe it's essential in these early days of the 21st century to realize that human well-being depends upon meeting the needs of all people, but doing so within the means of our planet. And these two sides of the donut are deeply interdependent. If we want to have sufficient food, then we need fertile soils, we need rainfall, we need a benevolent climate. If we want to have health and fun in the sunshine, we need a protective ozone layer overhead. So our well-being depends upon both sides of this circle. And it already changes the shape of progress. I think the economics of the 20th century deeply told us that progress is an ever-rising line of GDP growth. But this tells us that the shape, the feel of progress is very different. It's balance. And to me, this is the fundamental shift in our metaphors of what human prosperity looks like. It's not endless growth. It's balance, one we understand in our own bodily health. So I offer this to you as a compass for 21st century human prosperity. But if it's a compass, then where are we now? And that's not an easy picture to look at, because all of the red in this image shows us either the extent to which people are falling short on the essentials of life, or we are overshooting our pressure on the planet. For example, on food, this little red wedge goes 11% of the way to the middle of the circle, because 11% of people worldwide don't have enough food to eat every day. But you can see that on every one of those social dimensions, there are people in countries rich and poor who are falling short. And yet, while that human deprivation persists, we have already overshot at least 4 of these planetary boundaries. On climate change, on biodiversity loss, on excessive fertilizer use with nitrogen and phosphorus, and on land conversion. So this picture, a snapshot of our condition, I think of it as humanity's collective selfie. It's our picture of who we are in these early days of the 21st century. And I believe it defines humanity's generational challenge. This is the challenge of our generation, to turn this story around and begin to meet the needs of all people for the first time in human history, but to do so while coming back within the means of our planet. 20th century economic thinking never saw this picture. So why would we imagine that 20th century economics was going to solve its challenges? 20th century politicians and business leaders never saw this picture. We need 21st century economics, politics, and business to take on the challenge that we now understand lies behind our own prosperity. And as a renegade economist, somebody who studied economics but was deeply frustrated by what I was taught, my passion is to be part of the movement to rewrite economics so that it actually equips us to take on this challenge. And I'll speak briefly to 2 principles that I think we need to put at the heart of 21st century economics. The first is that the 20th century was dominated by centralized institutions and technologies. And in the 21st century, we can create distributed institutions and technologies. Think of generating energy. In the 20th century, you had an oil rig, a coal mine, a gas field. Energy in the 21st century, it's a distributed network of renewable energy, solar panels, wind turbines, dotted around the world, connected in a way that has never been possible before. Think of communications. In the 20th century, every telephone call went through a central operator system and out the other side. The 21st century, we have the internet. Distributed connection. This has never happened before, so for the first time, distributive technologies for energy and communications are on our side, and I see this as an unprecedented opportunity. But also the 20th century was dominated by corporate institutions that concentrated wealth and power in the hands of large-scale corporations. And in the 20th century, I think we are seeing a resurgence of cooperative organization, of small-scale employee-owned enterprises brought together in an ecosystem of enterprise. Again, this is a new opportunity for distributing wealth far better than has happened in the past. So that's the principle of shifting from centralized to distributive ownership of the sources of generating wealth. The second one I want to mention, I need a hose pipe, is that the 20th century was dominated by degenerative industry. We take Earth's materials, stuff them in the pipe, energy and matter, we make them into things we want, we use it for work, and then we throw it away. And this is pushing us over planetary boundaries. So we need to take this linear industrial system and turn it into a loop so that resources are used again and again rather than being used up. That waste from one process is seen as food for another process. Can I ask you to hold that one, Craig? But then one industry, one clothing company that made Craig's suit says, send me back your clothes and we'll turn them into new clothes. But then another company will say, well, let's say the company that made Ursula's jacket, send me back your clothes and I'll make them into a new glue. Imagine if every company that made the clothes on our back said, send me back your clothing. I want to ask all of you to imagine that you're part of this circular economy. So make a little loop above your head. Yes, really? That's it, make a little loop above your head. This is the circular economy that we are at risk of creating. You look beautiful. Thank you. But Mother Nature would laugh at us because nature doesn't turn a flower into a flower and a bird into a bird. Nature breaks resources down. Guess what? She creates an ecosystem. She uses hydrogen and carbon and oxygen again and again as cellulose and lignin and keratin, the building blocks of life. So we need to create a circular economy that is not segmented like this, but is an ecosystem. And this is the industrial challenge of the 21st century. You can put those down. Let me finish with one last comment, which is who we believe we are. Because 20th century economics put at the heart of its theories a little character. Here he is. This is rational economic man. A little man. He stands alone. He has money in his hand. He has ego in his heart. It says me here. He has a calculator in his head and nature at his feet. This depiction of ourselves is so destructive because the model changes who we actually become. Students learning about this character actually become more like him through the course of their studies. And one of the greatest realizations we must make is that we are not just me, we are we, the collective. We are one of the most social of all animals, deeply interdependent upon each other. Value is not just financial. There is value in social, environmental, spiritual, and cultural goods. And we cannot have the certainty of calculating everything because we live in a world of uncertainty and risk, and therefore must embrace uncertainty into how we create and conduct our economies. So let me leave it there. I believe that if we are going to take on this existential challenge, we need a new economics that equips today's students and today's policymakers with a mindset that is actually fit for our times. Thank you very much.
our format here calls for a brief interaction with each of the presenters, and then there will be a time at the end for our audience to ask questions as well. I want to ask Kate Raworth just a couple of questions, and they're for elaboration. You're part of a movement that has been trying to rethink economics for a number of years. You characterize this as trying to make the 21st century economics. And it goes beyond the discipline narrowly defined to all those who think about and research economic questions, whether they are by discipline in management or sociology or whatever else. I want to ask you first to help us see that this is having some traction in the world. What traction has new economic thinking had, not just in academic settings, where there is some resistance still, but more broadly, where has the traction begun to occur?
So I find that the traction of new economics is having significant traction basically everywhere except in the economics departments, I will be honest. I find that within academia, I'm invited by urban sustainability studies departments, architecture schools, sustainability schools, organizations that are dealing with the real world as it is. If you want to understand the challenges of 21st century economics, go to a city, because it has everything, right? It has the complexity of human organization, it has the climate change impact, infrastructure, energy systems. Those who are designing 21st century cities, I believe, are the true economists of the 21st century. Economics means household management. How are we going to manage our household in the interests of all its inhabitants? I've been working with architects in Stockholm who are developing a new suburb of the city, who have taken the Doughnut as the blueprint for thinking about how to design a suburb. How can they make it distributive and regenerative by design? I'm finding it's taken up in schools, in progressive businesses, and even government, political parties that I never imagined would be interested have been saying, how can we embed this in our new vision of the 21st century economy? So I think, to be very honest, economics departments are being far too insular and really losing an opportunity to be at the center of rethinking 21st century economy.
So, if I may, part of the takeaway message is that wherever people are trying to understand practical problems in the world and act on them, they see the need for new thinking and for thinking from multiple perspectives.
Yes.
It's only in settings that are defended against that in some way that we don't see that.
Yes.
And that's worrying. Let me ask another possibly related question. You talked about the centralization versus decentralization and distribution. And I wonder if you could relate these and the conception of an ecosystem here a little bit to power, to corporate power and state power, and these sort of real world concentrations of power. It's not just intellectual perspective. It is the fact that there is concentrated power in the world that creates this issue.
So, yes, the concentration of power, corporate power, I believe, arose because largely 20th century energy systems and industrial systems required investment in huge single entities like an oil rig. You need to bring together large amounts of capital to actually invest in an oil rig or in a large factory. And so the technologies drove that need to create corporate concentration of money. I think it's fascinating that the technologies we have now are inviting a web of many players. And you don't need that same concentration of corporate wealth in one hand. You can have a solar panel on the roof of every home, and so the household or the school or the community own the capacity to generate energy rather than one large company. But again, think of the internet. It distributes voice, political voice. Everybody has a node of this in their pocket with their smartphone. And this is transformative of opportunities of political power. We can have people's real-time democratic voice being spoken much more loudly than it was possible last century when we didn't have decentralized communication. It is a threat to those who hold that centralized power. How do they hold on to it when the technologies are enabling this? And I think we're seeing transformations in democratic interactions and institutions because of what's possible. We're seeing transformations in economic institutions because because of the decentralization, it's possible. And also, I'd ask Emily, for centuries, for 500 years, knowledge has been controlled through patents and copyrights. I create an invention, I own it. The open source movement of Creative Commons and open source licensing is upending the way that ideas are created and shared and regenerated. So it's a threat to old holders of power and a fascinating opportunity for those who want to create new institutions fit for our time.
So if I hear you again, technology is creating opportunities for new distributed social relations and thus power relations. And yet, we can't just assume technology is going to make all of this happen. It still requires action in relation to the existing centralization of power. So whether it's through social movements or other organizations, there's work for us all to do on this.
And of course, just to be clear, in round 1 or 2 of the internet, it's got captured. Facebook, Google, Amazon, so large players have come in and captured the network. But this is just the beginning. I believe there are new movements coming through saying, actually, let's move to Internet 3.0, which redistributes that power again.
And this is just the beginning of the panel, because we move on to a second speaker set of questions and another perspective, although I think you will find that all the perspectives here are congruent with each other and build on each other. Ursula Oswald Spring is the Secretary General of the International Peace Research Association. She is a professor in the National University of Mexico, in Cuernavaca in this case, at the Regional Center for Multidisciplinary Research. She's a former Secretary of Environmental Development in the state government in Morelos, and she is the author of Engendered Sustainable Peace and of Transitions to Sustainability. So she will speak to us next. We'll continue to trade clippers.
Many thanks.
Yes, got it.
Fine. I first want to thank a lot the World Social Forum for this brilliant organization, the Japanese organization, for their very precise and very educated organization. Everything was just functioning perfectly. Many thanks. Also to break and to us together, all of you being here to speak about. So, what's going on with existential risks? And there, my question is, how can humankind reduce these existential risks? They exist all over, of climate and global environmental change, through this engendered sustainable security. Where can overcome inequity, and obviously, where can we avoid this vulnerability, social and environmental vulnerability? And this brings us to a deep paradigm shift of this violent, dominant system we have at the moment. This economic system is still dominant on Earth. And we need, therefore, a process of scientificization. What's going on Earth? How are we impacting? We had the Doughnut approach. We had also other things we will see about. Then, when we have this process, I think we need a decentralized politicization process. We need to take really concern about what's going on. And finally, we need a securitization process, but a new security approach, which I will present there. So, in order that humankind and nature can survive and not only suffer. So, we have this both. We have ecosphere, which is affected, and we have the anthroposphere, which is affecting both. And we have a change from the Holocene, this 11,000 of years, to the Anthropocene, where the dominant process is going precisely through the humankind and through our destructive behavior. So, we have causes very clearly. Our anthropogenic process of emissions of greenhouse gases, of our consumerist behavior, of our waste we are producing, and obviously of our deforestation processes, industrialized agriculture, massive fossil use, and so on, we have produced consequences of increase of temperature. You can see it here, without any doubt, from 1958 on, we have an enormous increase going on sea level rise. We have a problem in Greenland ice shield. We are getting now a problem in the Antarctic ice shield. So what I'm proposing, a new approach to security. So away from the military state understanding where the state and the territorial integrity are in the center, towards a huge security, a human, a gender, and environmental security. So this huge security, obviously our reference object changed from human towards humankind, putting us as humankind in the center, towards gender relations, and gender relations understood as social creation of masculinity and social creation of femininity. So we must change both. And there we have an enormous potential, we women. We are not only half of society on earth, but we are also the mother of the other half. So we have the potential to change this dominant masculinity, as Betty Regan very clearly speaks about, no? Where we have a subordination through a violent behavior, so we can go through a new process. So the last 8,000, 9,000 years, we had this dominant system of destroying humankind, dominating through violence, and also destroying nature. So what are the outcomes? Obviously, tremendously, this is just from the World Economic Forum, we have still an enormous inequality in the economic participation of women. So we must, men and women, forced to get more women inside of this process in order to get a new process. And specifically, we have to overcome the enormous gap in the political part in order to work on it. And we must care about the future of youth. Youth employment is probably one of the greatest problems and risks we have for the moment. And what is the point? Obviously, we are producing a hot Earth. And this brings us enormously problem. And then we have also to understand that 60% of the greenhouse gas emissions are produced only by 1 billion of people. Why? 3 billion of people only produce 5%. So there is also in this process an enormous inequality, and there is an ethical problem. This 1 billion is responsible to help this 3 billion in order to deal, because most of the southern countries, we are hardly affected, because we are living in the tropics, so warming up oceans are creating an enormous threat to our survival. So we have this process. So the mechanism is, as Kate was very clear, corporate globalization. So we must reduce drastically this process in order to deal with this. But we will also have, and I'm sure, disaster impacts will be one of the big drivers besides decentralized technology. Look, last year, United States paid 88% of all the disaster costs. It's a rational economy. So instead of preventing, just resolving the problem of disaster is not the way. So if we are going through a preventive behavior, risk reduction, we will enormously increase our potential, and we will avoid this cascading effect. And I think Japan is just a country which has learned a lot that cascading effects are unpredictable. We can't model them because suddenly we have an earthquake, we have a tsunami, then we have a problem with a nuclear plant which is burning up, and finally we have the biggest ocean polluted with nuclear waste. Yeah. So we have a big problem. We have also a problem on livelihood, problem on migration. Probably we will have the most or the biggest challenge on Earth, how to deal with the coming migrations of environment, not only because of the sea level rise, but also because of the drought. So this will create cultural changes. This will create a lot of conflicts where processes of land grabbing and other negative behavior will challenge you. But we have also, and it's very interesting, getting an alliance of the corporate people, because the Davos meeting this year saw that we will have new challenges. We will have precisely potential economic threats. We will have trouble, and we can get some trade wars. So this will destabilize the country. So what I'm proposing is the huge security as a value and a goal to achieve an enchanted, sustainable peace with complex interactions where we need this deep transformation to deal with. And there, how can we get it? Obviously, we have the bottom-up approach of the international organization, UNCCD, UNFCCC, CBD, and we have now an agreement with the UN debate on Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030. So this gives us a potential. But we have also, and coming from the South, a paradigm shift to the present globalization process. And this goes with this model of decentralized. How can we get living well promoted by indigenous people? What does mean living well? Prioritize life. We need only good life. We don't need better life. No, it's enough. We need consensus, peaceful negotiation of conflicts, respect of differences. Life with the idea of complementarity. Promote cultural identity and diversity, accept differences. The big changes worldwide, all the big revolutions we get are not economics, they are cultural. Remember, from hunter-gathering towards agriculture, then later towards industrialization with urbanization. And now with globalization process, with decentralization, it's an enormous shift in cultural terms, not only and much less in economic terms. So, living well means how to drink, how to eat, how to dance, how to work, not lying, not robbing, no corruption, and obviously no waste. We can do this circular economy, this gift economy where all we can work together, promote unity for all, with social control, where women, elderly and children are involved, they are part of this system. And obviously we need to recover our natural resources, care about our native seeds, our biodiversity, our ecosystem services, and this brings us to a global transition process where a societal transformation is rooting top-down and bottom-up action. This living well with happiness, solidarity, sustainability, ecological resilience, together with the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. So, what type of prosperity we will have in a post-growth economy? Green investment, promoting decarbonization and dematerialization. So everything must be recycled in the production and in the consumption. We need a peaceful and sustainable negotiation process. And we must understand, for the first time, the security approach is no longer military. We are our own threat. We are our own victimizer. We are producing the risk and we are producing the disasters. But at the same time, we are the victims. So forget, no arm, no weapon will help this. We need to change our process together. And this implies gender equity, social equality, care of vulnerable, disaster risk management, and obviously disaster risk processes. And this brings us to the last point. How can we manage development process in a decentralized way with mitigation and adaptation? And then we must work together at the same time on renewable energies, on integrated water management, on sustainable technology, in order to change the process we have in order to promote a development process where we can have, on one side, a reduction of social vulnerability, a reduction on environmental vulnerability, because we will have extreme events, and they are growing. You have it now with a lot of typhoons, we have it with a lot of hurricanes in my region, but we have also droughts, we have floods. So all these kind of extreme events we can avoid, but we can reduce the social vulnerability that an extreme event gets transformed into disaster. And this is basically transparency of knowledge, transparency of finances, solidarity, resilience building, and a whole process of an alternative, caring about Mother Earth, avoiding that our hothouse Earth will destroy humankind, may not survive if we continue as we are. I remember when we were starting with the illusion in Biosphere 2 in the Arizona desert. The project failed. We couldn't artificially review the whole process of integration of this complexity of ecosystems. So let's learn, instead of continuing to destroy, to create risks. Let us work in order to maintain this beautiful Earth we have. Many thanks.
Let me, pardon? Evidently I did it in some fashion, but how I don't know and how I like it. There we go. I want to underscore something you said and then ask a question if I can. You stressed gender in several dimensions of this, and I think this is crucial. It's one of the strongest examples of a social phenomenon that is built into all of these kinds of existential risks and the transformations that are entailed. And I wanted just to underscore that. You stress the way in which women are underrepresented in political, and I'm afraid it's true of corporate and other power regimes as well, even academic. But I would add, women are also overrepresented in certain ways in disasters, aren't they? In both the suffering and in providing care for disasters. So is this correct? Characterizing disaster?
Absolutely, because when we started with disaster risk management at United Nations University, the first thing we struck, and I think it was in Mexico when we had a big earthquake, I saw how many more women died compared with men. So I had it all the time, what's going on? And obviously when we had the chance to do more systematic research, people said, oh, women are not trained, so they don't know how to run or to swim, or they have a starry or long hair. No. When we ask the people who survive, they say, oh, my mom ran to save me. She helped me. She ran again to save my father, or still an animal in the household. And this was the reason. So this caring potential women have, I think we must also, getting on the male side, caring both together. And this means also we must be trained, we women, that this caring potential is not being a problem of losing our life. So we must get specific training on this process in order to manage it. And you know, this is a very important theme to discuss. Disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction is basically in hand of men. Why don't we have just sharing half and half? And then we could really combine both potential, this complementary of both trained and educational process, and this changing in a new mentality of masculinity and femininity in order to care about the survival of humankind and of Earth and to reduce the existing risk.
That's a fantastic note. Thank you. Let me turn to our last panelist now. There we go. We are very fortunate to have with us Emiko Okuyama. Ms. Okuyama was trained as an economist, spent most of her career in the civil service in Japan addressing environment, community development, and education. She became the mayor of Sendai, an important position at any time, but she presided over it at an extraordinary time, because Sendai was one of the cities most affected by the Great Japanese Earthquake of 2011. In this context, Emiko Okuyama led immediate and continuing response that has been recognized in Japan and globally as highly successful, and also led the process of creating the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So with no more introduction, let me pass the clicker to Emiko.
ありがとうございます。皆さん、こんにちは。今日はこの素晴らしい国際会議の冒頭にこうして発言の機会をいただいたことをとても嬉しく思っています。また7年と6ヶ月前になりますが、世界中の皆さんから仙台、また被災地を支援をしていただいたことにもこの機会を借りて感謝申し上げたいと思います。
First of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the organizers for inviting me this important event. I am extremely happy to say a few words on this event. Since the East Japan earthquake, it has been 7 years and 6 months have passed. And by taking this opportunity, I would like also thank you for all of you to extend the support to us. Thank you very much.
ご覧のように、私は英語を話すのが苦手なので、通訳の方と2人で倍の時間を取りますので、日本語としてはコンパクトに進めたいと思っています。
So today, as you can see, I will use the translator as a consecutive translation. So I'd like to briefly talk about in Japanese.
仙台は人口が約100万の町ですけれども、すみません、パワーポイントお願いします。Quick. Yeah, this one. Yeah, I'm running now.
Okay.
This is. Yeah, okay. これが2011年の3月12日に仙台を襲ってきた津波ですけれども、海岸で約7メートルありました。
So as you can see, this tsunami hit the Sendai. The height was 7 meters.
で、この津波のおかげでですね、仙台市民は望んだわけではないんですけれども、今お二人の方からお話があったような、今私たちの地球を取り巻く大きな危険性、自然の力はもとよりですけれども、社会システムから来るさまざまな課題についても直面することになりました。
So unexpectedly, with this earthquake, the citizens of Sendai had to experience the difficulties in terms of the global and caused by the global environment, as well as the caused by the social system.
電気が全市でほぼ5日間にわたって完全に停電をしましたほか、ガスは復旧するまでに35日間もかかりましたし、またガソリンが1ヶ月近く慢性的な不足な状態が続きました。
So the electricity cut about 5 days, and the gas services took about 35 days for the restoration, and the gasoline has been short back for about 1 month.
でこの写真で見ていただきますように、市民は大部分の時間をガソリンを得るために何時間もガソリンスタンドの前で並ぶとか、また食品を買うために3時間も5時間もお店の前で並ぶとか、そういうことのために大変な時間を費やさなくてはいけませんでした。
So as you can see this photograph, most of the citizens had to spend their time to line up in front of the gas stations. Sometimes they had to make a line for about 3 to 5 hours in front of the shops.
日本のような大変高度に物流が発達し、エネルギーも出来上がっている国で、まさかこんな原始時代に戻るような経験をするとは私も夢にも思っていませんでした。
So in Japan, which has been developed, the well-developed distribution network, so I had never thought about this type of accident, also event what happened.
普段、日常では大変うまく機能しているものが、一回そのシステムが止まってしまうと、それを再び動かすのには大変な期間と労力を必要とするということを学びました。
So I learned about the lesson about this event because the things that have been functioned very well would be disrupted to one-time event, and we had a really hard time to restore the situation. It took a long time and hard labor.
ご承知のように、この東日本大震災では津波が大きな犠牲をもたらしましたけれども、その中の大きなエネルギーに関するものとして原子力発電所の事故がありました。
So as you may well know about the destructive power of the tsunami, however, we also had the problems related to the nuclear power plant.
日本のエネルギーに関する政策は、この原子力発電所の事故によって今大きな変革の時期を迎えていると思います。
So Japanese energy policy has now faced the important juncture after the accident of the Fukushima nuclear power plant.
日本の原子力発電所は約57基ありますけれども、今稼働しているのは9つです。
So today, Japan has about 57 nuclear power plants, and only 9 power plants has been now under operation.
自然再生エネルギーの利用を増やそうとしていますが、まだあまりうまく社会とうまく浸透するには至っていません。
Although we are trying to introduce the natural energy resources or the renewable resources, but society has not been ready for accept that energy sources.
100万都市のような大都市は大変多くのエネルギーを必要と、都市活動に大変多くのエネルギーを必要としますので、これからの都市のリスクを減らすという点では、エネルギーを一つのところから得るのではなく、たくさんのところから分散して得るような工夫が必要だと思います。
So the city with 1 million population like Sendai needs a lot of energy to do the city activities. So given that, we have to think about the potential risk of these urban areas where the energy would be lacked in some events. So we need to think about the introduction of that distribution of energy services.
都市のエネルギーに関する供給のシステムやその供給の在り方をもっとみんなでしっかりと考えていかなければいけないというのが私の教訓の一番最初の項目です。
The first lesson I learned from this earthquake is we have to work together to consider and think about what type of energy resources would be suitable for our generation.
で、私が学んだ2点目の大きな教訓は、大きな災害であればあるほど私たち行政は住民を直接助けに行くことはできないので、住民自身が自分たちを助け合う、そういう自主運営の能力を向上していかなければいけないということです。
Second lesson I learned from this earthquake is to nurture the mindset of the citizens who will have a bluntly and autonomous power to manage the disaster situations, because when the large-scale earthquake happened, the administrative officers were really powerless. We are not able to directly help all of them.
幸いなことにという言い方が日本にはあるんですけれども、仙台はこの東日本大震災以外にももう少し小さい マグニチュード 7.4 ぐらいの災害、地震が30年に1回ずつ来ると言われていまして、そういう意味では仙台市民は地震に対して一生懸命住民として訓練をして備えるという活動がとても熱心な地区です。
So in Japanese, we say that "saiwai" means likely, fortunately, means because Sendai have already experienced the magnitude 7.4 earthquake in the past, which is smaller than the East Japan earthquake. So this earthquake are said to occur in the interval of the 30 years. That's why when we think about the citizens of the Sendai, they are ahead of the other areas with the less earthquake.
ですから私たちは東日本大震災の前から避難訓練や防災訓練をしていたんですけれども、それでもまだまだ訓練の足りないところが明らかになりました。
So although we have been carried out a lot of the evacuation drills as well as disaster preparedness practices, but we found that it was still insufficient.
例えば私たちは地域の住民の人たちと行政で訓練をしていましたが、実際に震災の時には例えば東京から出張で来ていた人であるとか、普段は仙台にいない人が特に市の中心部にたくさんいて、2万人ぐらいのそうしたビジターの人たちが避難所に押し寄せてくる、そして混乱するということが起こりました。
So usually we conducted these drills with the citizens as well as the government, the organizations. However, when the earthquake happened, we could not imagine that there were a lot of the people from outside of the Sendai city, such as the business person who visited the Sendai as a business trip, as well as the visitors who were just came to the Sendai as a tourist or to some other businesses. So during the earthquake, we found 20,000 some like the visitors who are flocked into the evacuation centers.
実際に避難所を運営した時のリーダーは100% 男性がなるのが普通でしたので、そこでは例えば小さな赤ん坊を持つ母親のニーズであるとか、また高齢で歩くことが不自由な方の介護であるとか、また障害を持つ方の生活の面では非常にケアが行き届かないということがたくさん起こりました。
So what was common in the management of the evacuation center was like the male-dominated leadership, because the management of the evacuation centers were owned by 100% by men and men. So they were not able to grasp the needs of the mothers with small children, as well as there was a lack of care for the elderly people and the handicapped people.
そういう人たち、さまざまな状況の人たちに配慮した避難所を住民たち自身が運営していけるように、3.11 の震災の後に私たちはそれまで仙台市全体で一つしか作っていなかった避難所の運営のマニュアルをそれぞれの地域で、ということは避難所は仙台には約200カ所ありますので、200通りの異なったマニュアルを作ることにしました。
So based on that experience, and we found that there were a lot of people with a different background. So we decided to make the revised manuals, because we just had only one manual on whole Sendai cities. But what we did was made the individual and each manual for each evacuation centers that reflect the community's characteristics. That means we made 200 evacuation manuals.
そうした住民の学習と訓練が大切だということが2点目の私の得た教訓でした。
The second lesson I learned was I acutely felt the importance of the education and dreams of the citizens.
3点目として、こうした震災の時に得た教訓をどうやってこれから広く海外の方々やまた特に若い世代、これから生まれてくる若い世代にも伝えていくかということを考えなければいけないと思います。
And the third lesson I learned is try to find a way to disseminate and transmit this experience not only in Japan but also the overseas, as well as especially for the young generations.
仙台市では今、小学校1年生から中学校3年生までに全ての児童生徒に防災や減災についての教育をしています。
So in Sendai City, we provide the educational support for the first year of elementary school children to the third year of junior high school students about the disaster reduction as well as disaster preparedness education.
そしてまた去年の4月にはこの震災で大きな被害を受けた荒浜地区にある小学校を震災遺構として公開をしています。
So since the last April, we have been opened this Arahama Elementary School as a ruins of Great East Japan earthquake.
震災の後、仙台では2015年に、先ほどご紹介をいただいた第3回国連防災世界会議を開催し、そこで仙台防災枠組みが決定をされました。
So, as the moderator mentioned before, in 2015, the Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction was held in Sendai, and they adopted the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction.
そこでさまざまなこれから2030年に向けての世界的に行動すべき目標が定められましたけども、その中に女性の視点を大切にすることや、高齢者や障害を持つ人に配慮をした計画を国が作っていくことなどが盛り込まれたのは、私たちの経験が生かされたのではないかと思っています。
So the 7 global target to reducing the mortality rate from global disasters and increase the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategy were agreed upon for the first time, as well as this framework introduced the idea that we should bring into the perspective of the women and elderly people. That is really, I think, a new concept.
そしてその会議のセッションの中で、若い世代の人たちが自分たちの未来を自分たちで決めたい。大人が枠組みを作るのではなくて、若者がリードしてまちづくりを考えていきたいという発言が多数ありました。そういう若い世代とともに防災・減災についてこれからも取り組んでいきたいというふうに思っています。
So during the session of that conference, we heard a lot of voices from the young generation, and they said that don't decide our future without me or us, because they said the person or the people who shape the future are us. So with this in mind, we'd like to work together with the young generation to carry out the initiative of disaster prevention.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Emiko Okuyama. There's a lot we could follow up in this, and I'm conscious of time and not pulling up much. I do want to stress that in Sendai and more generally, Japan has not only experienced several devastating natural disasters, but has been in a learning process about how to plan for, prepare for, and respond to natural disasters, and has been very active in sharing this learning globally. So your presence here continues this. I'm going to ask you just one question, open the floor. Do you think that politicians, businesses, and citizens will make significant changes in disaster preparation without having to confront catastrophic events themselves?
はい、大変残念なことですけれども、この大きなカタストロフィックな災害に出会うことによって、社会が大きくチェンジしていく、ギアを入れ替えていくということは、日本社会でも東日本大震災の場合は起こったと思います。一つはやはり原発事故から原子力発電所の安全性について、日本全体がさらに深く考えるようになったこと、それから日本は東日本大震災の前は比較的ハードの防御力、具体的に言うと津波だと堤防とかを大変すごく立派な堤防を作ってこれがあるから大丈夫って言っていたところがあるんですけども、どんなに大きなこれまでにないような堤防を作っても地球が動くときにはそれを超えてしまうというそういう教訓を得て、やはりハードの防御と人が学んで行動するソフトの防御と両方なければいけないというのも大きな変革として政治家やビジネスの面でも今共有されてきた考え方だと思います。
Unfortunately, Japan has been experiencing this type of catastrophic disasters in the past, but it's also true that these disasters also driven the transformation of the society. Because two things I would like to take up is the one thing the security concerned about the nuclear power plant, because the nuclear power plant disaster, that Japanese people are increasingly concerned about the safety. And secondly, the Japan, for most of their effort for the disaster focused on the development of the hardware, but we saw the really study levee and the seawalls on the one part of the Tohoku region. But when the disaster happened, this levee was collapsed, and the sheer power of the nature sometimes go beyond our imagination. So in terms of the balance between the hardware side and software side, I think there has been the increasing awareness among the politicians, businesses, and industries or other citizens as well.
Okay. I hope, and I think we all hope, that there can be an increasing role for a global voice of science in speeding the learning process and the sharing process that can help us deal with existential risks. This is not only responding to disasters, but designing our cities and our societies in ways that will be able to handle this future better. I'm conscious that we started very late. Do we have time to ask? Yes, I'm being told. I do have time to invite questions from the audience. There are two microphones. I'm afraid I have to ask you to use microphones because live streaming, there's one in each aisle. So if you go to one of the microphones, then you can ask a question. Please indicate who you are, where you're from, and to whom on the panel you're asking the question. Don't raise your hands where you're sitting. Go to the microphones. Don't raise your hands where you're sitting. Go to the microphones. Please.
Thank you so much for this uplifting conversation. My name is Indri Asiel Lumumba. I'm from Cote d'Ivoire, the first producer of cocoa. That means some of the problems that were raised, deforestation for cash crop, timber industry, desertification, you name it. But I teach at Cornell University, and I'm serving currently as the president of the World Council of Comparative Education Societies. Some of the questions I had formulated have been more or less answered, at least in part, by Ms. Okuyama's intervention. The Western societies, I'm not here going to essentialize. No one has the answer, no society is perfect. However, they set a model, global model, that is still being chased in our societies. While at the same time, when I listen to Ms. Oswald Springs talk about indigenous model, indigenous knowledge system, there is something there to learn. There are South Africans here who are maybe better positioned to talk about it, but the term that captures that essence of Ubuntu, our collective well-being, not only as human, but connected to the environment. All these things that some, or if not all Africans were arguing when the Europeans arrived, and labels them as prelogical. How can they learn how to spirit? All these that are becoming the truth now. So my fundamental question is, how do we reformulate, reshape the education systems, both the formal, non-formal, informal, all the systems that make us create our desires, what is desirable, what is the model, what do we dream to becoming, so that we globally can talk about the same thing. Very briefly, I don't want to take too much time, but a colleague has argued that some of the weaknesses in the African societies for being dominated is because of that Ubuntu precisely. You treat the foreigner, the visitor, best than yourself, but if the visitor doesn't share your values, he or she would think that you have a complex of inferiority. That's why you're treating them that way. So my point is, we need to develop a world system of values that will not make some societies care about each other internally, while their business people go elsewhere, create chaos, and bring or take resources. So how do we go about reformulating concretely the education system globally to achieve that?
Thanks. Let me invite, see if there's one of you, might be Ursula, who wants to respond specifically on education. Would you like to?
Fine, yeah. Many thanks for your question. I think you touched the crucial issue. The educational system will enable us to change precisely the cultural process. You come from Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, I come from Latin America, 500 years of colonization. Obviously, the mindset behind our government is still colonial oriented. International laws are all done by the European colonial powers. So whatever we have in the World Trade Organization, in the International Monetary Fund, in the World Bank, all of them are imposed models of how to deal with the global conflicts. And all of them benefits just this very small elite, these men with this mentality of how can I increase my personal, individual. I think educational system must be now based in our countries on the new threats and the risks we are living with. And this means we don't need no more. Yes, we need an understanding and a framing, a different framing of our historical approach. And this means also ourselves to get out of this colonial imposition that we need to care about economic growth. How? If we don't work about livelihood, and we have in our countries to pay all the money we have from public budget for paying interest rates and loans back, we never will achieve a sustainable and stable society. So we must, on one side, internationally agree with you, it's a medical problem, not only an education problem. Both must work together. And I think the disaster coming up the next decade, and I'm threatened about that we don't have no more than 10 years to change our whole behavior and find a new way in a decentralized, sustainable, and gendered way to deal with the conflicts we are doing with our destructive behavior. And this, everything will go through the education system.
Thank you. Thank you both. Sorry.
Hi. So my name is Moisés Leme Silva. I'm a Brazilian professor from the Federal University of Bahia. So I'm an anthropologist too. And for a long time, our discipline defined itself as a way to make the world safe for human difference, right? So how do you think difference so that the world is safe for difference? In doing that, we at some point reached the understanding that the category of humankind, and even to be human, needed to be itself examined and criticized. And in most talks, I was a bit surprised by the use of the category in a very uncritical manner, maybe. And that's part of my question. I want to hear from you what exactly you mean by humankind, knowing that, for example, when you use the example of indigenous people, we know that their definition of human extends well beyond what we call human into animals. For example, they keep repeating jaguars are humans, and I'm not sure we're understanding what they mean. So when you use humankind as a central category in your talks, shouldn't we consider other forms of humanity, or to what extent does humanity go? What is the agency of the sea? Should it be understood as a type of human agency in our decisions or not? So I'm just curious about how do you define humankind? Thank you.
Do any of you want to take this up?
Thank you for this point. So I'm aware that the diagram I'm showing, the donut, is an anthropocentric framing. I'm absolutely aware of that. The planetary boundaries framework, I believe, is actually anthropocentric because it's asking what are the state of the planet which is best for humanity. And I'm using humankind there in what you'd say is a narrow sense. However, I was so struck by this framework when I first came upon it, the planetary boundaries framing, because I believe that all the frameworks that I've seen that have traction in the world, this gives the best chance, not only to human beings, but to all living species that are co-current in the Holocene with us. Because I believe that this characterization of humanity at the pinnacle, at the height of the pyramid of nature, right? This is where mainstream economics is mankind and his natural resources. We're standing on the pyramid of life and we can make use of it. And that, I believe, is a deeply problematic framing. What I found very powerful in the planetary boundaries framework is that it repositions humanity deeply interdependent on a web of life, of complex interacting systems that I think our generation are only just beginning to realize at the same time that we undermine these systems. So I see it as a step along the spectrum. If you're speaking of humankind in a far more diverse way, recognizing that actually we should see ourselves as part of much richer embedded in the rest of nature. I offer the donut as a framing that draws us from here at one end of the spectrum to something much richer that you're speaking of. And I believe the donut, let me hold it here, is helping to move us along that spectrum. I think leaping from this conception of humanity at the center of Earth and on the web pyramid of nature is a very large jump to the deep anthropological sense that you're now speaking of, that we are humanity and we should recognize ourselves much richer in a full web of life. Is probably too far for most people to leap in one go. And I think we need to move ourselves along that spectrum. So I offer what I'm bringing as a repositioning on that spectrum. So I'd love to hear more from what you're speaking about.
Are you telling us to stop or allowing us to have two last brief questions? Okay, let's take the two and we will answer them together rather than one at a time. Sir, and then sir.
Jean-Pierre Dupuis, philosopher in Paris. So it's a question for Mrs. I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce her name. Raworth.
It's very good.
Okay. Okay. So although I'm in full sympathy with your kind of message, I think that the image, I'm listening as a philosopher, of the donut is counterproductive. It leads you to reason in a way that sounds very much like the mainstream economist, something that I suppose you hate. Let me explain why. Okay, everyone has in mind the image of the donut that you showed. In the middle of the donut, there is a hole that appears as a void, as a lack. And then you're led to reason in terms of balance. That's the word you used. Mainstream economists would say equilibrium between filling up that gap, that void, and overshooting the opposite direction. And I think that's not at all what you want to say, because this so-called void, this absence, is a product of the system. Scarcity is not a given. It's the system itself that produces this void. And since your neighbor here, Mrs. Oswald Spring, has some connection with Fukuoka, I'm thinking here of Ivan Illich's thinking. Of course. I don't want that. So instead, I would suggest that you use the image of the Swiss Gruyere, because the holes in the Gruyere are part of the process. We are not absences.
Thank you. Please.
Well, I disagree with the last speaker. I'm Jeffrey Rosen from the University of Edinburgh. And my question is also directed towards Kate Raworth. I'm a great fan of your donut. I think it's a very powerful image. It exemplifies the dilemma that we're in rather well. You also, of course, mentioned the fact that we live in a new Earth, a networked Earth where information now spreads and communities communicated with far greater intensity than we've ever known. But you just wonder whether you aren't being digitally optimistic. A decade ago, we thought that the web would bring us a new phase, a different sort of democracy. And of course, what we discovered is that the web is indifferent to truth or falsehood, which creates powerful problems of its own. And on the other hand, one could argue that the web has been influential in helping to create these enormous monopolies that are now emerging. I'd be really interested to have your perspective from you, the way in which you think this new world of information might even impact on your diagram, on your donut. Where's it taking us?
Okay.
Kate, over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much for this Gruyere, which is a lovely other metaphor. I believe that the diagram I showed with the red wedges going both inside and outside, to me this is showing that the deprivation is part of the system we have. What is it about the global economic system that we have today that enables millions of people still to be less unable to meet their basic needs, and yet humanity collectively has overshot our pressure on the planet? And to me, this reveals both the inherent degradation of the industrial systems that we've used, but also the deep inequality in terms of control and use of resources in the world. So I welcome other ways of drawing things. I hope the donut is just a passing phase on humanity's greater understanding of our predicament and our prosperity. But I have found it useful, and I've found many people have found it a useful reconfiguration of our interdependence with Earth's living systems. On this point about being digitally optimistic, I do definitely sound this morning digitally optimistic. Because what I want, it's so easy to be digitally pessimistic, right? We're captured by Facebook and Google and Amazon and eBay, and this capture happens so quickly. What I wanted to say is the idea that this distributed energy and distributed information has never been the technologies that we've had before. And they are distributed. They can be captured. You can capture distributed networks by being the first mover in a network. And that's what's happened so far. But that capture is largely driven by who owns the network and the finance that's behind it, and therefore determines its design. And what I'm seeing in some social movements are, let's say, round 3 of the internet, where platform cooperatives are emerging to offset the platform capitalism that has captured round 2. So platform cooperatives that work with open source design, that work with the Fab Lab city movement of 3D printing. I think another internet is possible, and so I'm speaking optimistically to that possibility. Otherwise, we just come to see the internet as something that's captured by large corporations. There are other ways of designing it which require different purpose and ownership and finance behind them. So I'm going to speak with optimism about that possibility, otherwise we'll never achieve it. But thank you for this question.
With optimism, I'm going to close the session. So we live in an extraordinarily complicated world, a highly unequal world, a world nonetheless in which we confront existential risks, but in which we need to problematize that very word, we, with regard to the diversity of societies in the world and with regard to the problems in defining the human. We have a lot of work to do on all of these background conditions and on the issue of existential risk itself, but thank you to the World Social Science Forum, thank you to the new International Council for Science, the ISC. We will be addressing these issues in the future, and we means all of you. Thank you.
A big thank you to all the panelists. A big thank you to you, Craig. So just a quick reminder, we now have sessions starting. The program of the forum is now starting. At 5 o'clock today will be the opening ceremony in this room, so please come back at 5. And then from at 6 on second floor, there's the welcome reception. At 4:40.
Sorry.